Thank you for tuning in. You have reached SAMVAAD for Zaikana. My name is SAMVAAD, and we are going to be discussing today about the impact of COVID-19, especially in the queer community, which is the LGBTQIA+. How the pandemic situation led a lot of them to go back to their hometowns, be with their families, and be in really sufferable situations where their expression or freedom was hampered. My guest is going to be joining me in a short while, but before I introduce my guest, I just want to call it out that not everybody belonging to the queer community was suffering. Not the group who came from well-off families, not the group who's currently surrounded by their loved ones and continue to fend for themselves by working, by following their passion, etc. We are specifically talking about the oppressed communities, the margins who belong to those states of India who probably do not have that understanding or awareness about spectrum, about what LGBTQIA plus means. About my guest now, he is a 21/22 year old, 22-year turning old student who belongs to both Kerala and Goa, and so imbibes both their culture. He's a senior student of English literature at Ashoka University, and he feels that he still grapples with his identities and asserts that identities change, restructure, and orient depending on the spaces he inhabits. Through his growing up years, he had an understanding of him being queer, and also that he has always been unconventional in the way he would walk, talk, sing, dance. His name is Roshan Roy, and his areas of research and writing include language politics, queerness in media, queering theology, and what it means to be queer in Indian spaces. His thesis also includes exploration of Goan folk music and his attempt to sensualize, sexualize, and queer it. Please welcome Roshan Roy. Thank you for joining. Where are you joining us from, and how are you doing today?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. I am joining you from Goa and I've been doing good. I just got done with my last semester, so it's a good feeling. And I'm glad I'm doing this right after that.
Absolutely. Okay. I want to begin by asking, because we wanted to focus this discussion about the impact of COVID-19 or pandemic on the queer community. And because media has not been covering a lot about it, although there are some like Indian Express, which has gone on to say the COVID-19 pandemic has worsened the discrimination being faced by the LGBTQ community in India. That's what their headline read. And then Quotes India saying the COVID-19 pandemic hasn't been a great equalizer for India's queer population. As somebody who has been researching a lot, working closely on these topics, we are dealing with this second wave right now, and we are probably to go into the third wave. How do you weigh in on this situation?
Yeah, especially as a student, I think my perspective will be slightly different over here because as students, we go, especially queer students, we sort of move away from our houses. There's always a journey outwards from places where we are often, repressed or like suppressed, our identity sort of suppressed, and we go to university spaces, which in some sense are liberal, especially in terms of different cities where people go to Bangalore or Delhi or other cities. And you think when you move away, you have some sort of, freedom to sort of experience your identity in a more fully. And then, what the pandemic did was send these students back home, right? You had to come back to the families. And especially when it happened for the first time in 2020, I think, yeah, last year when it happened, it was quite shocking because you did not know how to prepare for it. You did not know how to go back to, probably abusive parents or homophobic parents or friends who are very homophobic, and you probably to a place where you don't have any connections to. So how it really marginalizes the community is because we are sort of facing this sort of discrimination firsthand. Because you come home, you are put in an environment that you do not want to be in. Apart from this, you have to look after your academics, you have to look after your work. Because in order to perform well in your academics or in order to do any work, you require that sort of environment, which is not very ideal. And I think that's just increasing day by day. This with the rising number of cases and these different waves which are going on, it's not getting better. It's getting worse and worse every day. And yeah.
Right. And you're right that the perspective while you are a student is going to be different. Okay. I remember last year when was the first wave of the lockdown. Sometime during May or June is when a lot of information circulated about female domestic abuse and the helpline numbers that were available that you can reach out if you see your maid being assaulted or harassed at home, or any kind of domestic violence related to females in specific. And many people have started asking questions about that, but there's very little discourse on the impact these spaces have had on the queer community, many of whom are more subject to increased supervision, like you mentioned. And I read an article where it said there is also a heightened sense of dysphoria among the individuals, which is just so unpleased with life. Um, are there organizations or people or groups that you are working with, basis your first-hand experiences, who have reached out to you with such stories? And are there existing some helpline numbers which are there to help? And because we're not hearing so much about it, what do you think are the reasons that these are not being promoted?
Yeah, I think there can be multiple reasons for this. I, for one, have multiple mental health disorders, and it's been very difficult because you do not know which is the right place to reach out. And because since we are already on the outskirts, we are already on the periphery by the virtue of being queer, then you are sent home, which is again not a safe environment for you. You cannot access the same kind of resources like everybody else because of these conditions, and you probably do not have the financial stability to sort of go and seek therapy or like meet a psychiatrist or have medicines and all of that. So these helpline numbers in that sense really work. But again, there are really few places which have queer affirming therapists or queer affirming folks who are on the other hand, on the other side of the helplines. For what I know, there's a helpline that is run by Tarshi, which is again a non-profit government organization from Delhi, which operates from Delhi. They write about sexuality, queerness, and everything, and they also deal with a lot of mental health stuff. So they have a mental health helpline that is running for queer folks. There's no coverage around this issue, and what we require now is conversation, like the one we're having right now.
Right. Specifically to the COVID context, do you feel India, I mean, we're still in a very nascent phase, but do you feel that are there communities outside India or other countries who took active steps focused on COVID-19 related relief, or to the queer community who lost jobs due to COVID, or very specific to COVID context? Are there best practices, anything that we can take inspiration from as a nation, as people who are still trying to just understand this?
First of all, even if you are sort of having some sort of an organization or some sort of an helpline to help LGBTQ folks,
yeah,
it is again sort of only what is that? It's also an advantage only for people who are say out, who are comfortable talking about their queerness, who are comfortable talking about their struggles that arises because of the queerness that they have embraced.
yeah,
And it really becomes difficult for people who are still closeted, right? Who are still scared of how to present it. And I think it's also difficult for organizations and for people who are really trying to help, because then you require a lot more resources, a lot more expertise to sort of craft, help in such a way that you are also protecting the identity of the person but also trying to help the person. So there's a
Yeah.
lot going on in that sense.
Right, right, right. Um, I want to ask is to, apart from creating more spaces where we could have active conversations about this, which makes all of us around very comfortable, what could be done more in terms of creative and cultural expression by people belonging to the communities now, in a very very now time, so we deal with this better, so that more of us step up to get together.
I think a very simple thing that we can do is use social media, because everybody is using it and we see how much of an impact it is having. I
Yeah.
think a very simple act, like if I would suggest, like whoever is out and whoever is comfortable with their identity, especially, the type of influencers we see who have the power, who have the resources to amplify voices.
Yeah.
Even for me, for example, if I am putting out a story on Instagram or I'm putting up a post on Instagram, talking about just my life, just, the type of struggle which is very unique in this time, which is very unique to the identity because of the identity that I'm facing. And I think that can definitely help. Second is again sort of reaching us, since if you have the power, if you have the energy, if you have the resources during this time, which many of us do, right? Even queer folks, many of us do, many of us have this sort of privilege that we are still unaffected by COVID directly, and we can do something actively for the community. So reaching out to different organizations, trying to find out, trying to sit with these organizations, trying to craft policies, or trying or craft, whatever things that are required for the community existing.
Right.
You do not have to create a new sort of medium to bring the voice out. There is already a lot on the internet. You can use the internet and do something for the community.
Right, absolutely. As a student, and you would have greater insight into this, so I just want to understand specifically the communities, especially the transgender community, and there's a wide group whose only source of income was probably begging in trains, right? They have lost the jobs, and we don't know when that kind of movement in trains or vehicles or buses would be available. So for the community who has lost job in this way, what is a silver lining, because they cannot be going back to doing what they were? Does this also sort of push all of us, and specifically the community, to think of alternatives? And are we in a position to maybe have those conversations to go from, okay, we were doing this, but we want to go to do better? I mean, it's a very messy thing, because we do not have opportunities. One, second, we want them to work in better environments, get into jobs which are more respectable. But yeah, please share your perspective.
No, I think yeah, that's a really good question, because along with the type of jobs you mentioned that they were doing, which is begging or like all those shows, they were also doing sex work. They were
Right.
really right, and you cannot access human bodies during this time, which is very dangerous.
Yeah.
So that's also an important part of it. And I think everybody from the community and also from outside the community, like people, allies, everybody's thinking of alternatives at this point. Also, you might have read during the pandemic, I'm not sure which state, but a state sort of employed transgender folks
Yeah.
for the police force and everything. So that's again something, that is conventionally not done,
Yeah.
but is now, people have started doing it.
Right.
So I think what we require now is to sort of, again, whoever has the privilege, whoever has the power, whoever has the energy and the time during this pandemic, to sort of educate folks to begin with, educate queer folks tell them about the alternate career paths, something that they can aim at, something that they can work towards. Because I think that is what is important right now. Because I know of many transgender folks. I was working with some from Hyderabad, and for to cover a small story, and right from this very childhood age, they are sort of taken into that path, right, of sex work. And they're not, there is no sort of planning, there's no sort of thinking that conventionally happens with, say, other folks in our society, right? And I think that sort of knowledge is very important, and I think it's also time for us to export that knowledge to people, to whoever who does not have access to that knowledge.
Right, right, right. True. Um, you said it's your last semester. I do want to ask, between last year and this year, ever since COVID hit, related to your research or what you've been working on, has there been a major revelation? Has there been something that completely stunned you in terms of anything?
Right. So I am, for one, very privileged because I study at Ashoka,
Yes.
and because we have this unlimited reach to different resources, and so it's only been getting better, I can say. And with COVID, really, again, although like it's very difficult at my home, but I am also privileged because I am sharing space with another person and I'm living in their house, and this is not my house even now, because it's really impossible to sort of imagine learning from my house because of the type of environment we are
Right.
in terms of space, in terms of just you I remember this one thing that our professor was saying. We were sort of, doing this class, and we were talking about some caste-related issue in one novel, and suddenly this girl was speaking in the class, and her mother sort of yells, and her mic was on, and everybody heard that, and everybody started giggling. And Professor Kotari, she said one thing. She was like, how can we expect Indian households to be US style offices? You literally cannot. And because that girl was going on apologizing, so she was like, there's nothing to apologize. This is the Indian reality. This is what is Indianness. And there is no hiding away from it. So it could have gotten disruptive for me, but because I had access to a different space and access to resources, it was better. In terms of my research, I would say I never thought I would write on music, although I am a musician and I have been performing for a very long time.
Right.
And even that's been really bad because of COVID, because I cannot go out and perform
Yeah.
and sort of earn to support my mental health, whatever resources. So I picked up on music and I'm writing on music now, and it's been really different. I thought I would write on something different, but I'm doing something different now.
Right. What is the road ahead for you after you finish your semester and get the degree? What do you dream of doing?
Yeah, so I, for one now, I'm going to work on my thesis. After that, I really sort of am working on a book project. It's about documenting queer lives from the Northeast, and it's with the Chinky Homo project. It's a small it's a big community,
Right.
yeah, from the Northeast, and they're coming out with a book. It's all non-fiction stories from people from Northeast who have been facing mental health issues, who
Right.
are queer, and times during COVID and everything. So I'm working on that, and I, for one, have decided to go with music, something that I was trying to avoid for a really long time, and I
Right.
thought I would work with some other aspect of queerness. But what I'm trying to do through this thesis is trying to queer Goan folk music, which was already queer when it began in Goa, but then the church sort of came in and sort of purified the form. And so my attempt is to queer it again through
So
the
when you
music.
say I want to queer it again, can you explain what it means?
Yeah, so trying to present the history of something. So when you know the history of something, the history is, in the terms of like, so the Catholic Church uses terms. It called that music. It was a dance in form, like dance and music form. So what they said was, the dance forms are very perverse and they are very sensuous and they're very revealing, and they try to purify it so that it, fit their propaganda, fit the type of, casteist and classist type of performance that they wanted. And my attempt is to sort of retrace it, go back to where it all began, to sort of bring it back, to sort of open up the sort of history that is not known to people. Especially there's like very less work that's being done on, Goan art forms or Goan literature, Goan music, all of that. And I really, through this education and through everything, my main aim is to build on Goan literature, to sort of take it away from this position that it is already as a location, as a space in novels, as a space in it holds in movies or anything, like any plot line, right? It's always fetishized. It's always with beaches and everything. So I, after this, want to work on maybe a project, just documenting lives from Goa through photography, through non-fiction narratives. So just interviewing people, writing about their lives, especially their queer lives, the lives of, women who are sort of working with their families in the casual fanny farms over here, because there is a lot of labor that is women centric here, and a lot of this is unknown because everything is purified and you always get the best scene of it when you come to Goa.
Yeah.
But it's sort of doing the behind the scenes work and sort of repeating all of that. So that's what I primarily want to do. So even if I go anywhere, and I'm planning to sort of move away from India to do, to do a more focused research on this, because queer musicology, the area that I'm interested in, is it's not widely studied in India, and there are like very less resources.
Right.
So even though I might move away, but my aim is to always come back to where I started and then to sort of queer everything up.
That's wonderful. I am so glad we got to speak. Thank you for selecting causes which are close to your heart, the ones which define you. And thank you for continuing to work on stories which are lesser heard of, unknown of. And we cannot wait to see your work featured across places, to know more about Goa, because we only know or see one side of it. And thank you so much for talking to us about this very, very important issue. We hope this conversation helps bring out more conversations and create the safe spaces we are all looking for, especially needed in this time. Thank you, Roshan.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right.
Love's got humor. She's a giggle at a funeral. It's everybody's disapproval. I should have worshipped her sooner. If the heavens ever did speak, she's the last true mouthpiece. Every Sunday's getting more bleak. Fresh poison each week. We were born sick, but I love it. Come at me to beware.